So being on this stage is really amazing for me, particularly because this whole journey started for me at the Graduate Studies program of Singularity University. I was part of GSP 12. And it was really this life-changing experience. It's this summer, it's basically an entire summer that's like a TED conference. Amazing, interesting presentations by world-changing, clinicians, Nobel Prize winners, people from every field. And then you get to work on a project of your own. And because I was sort of bridging between two fields, this was, it's not an exaggeration to say it was a really life-changing experience for me. And it really led to where I am today. So I studied economics and computer science. I didn't study biology. I was always very interested, but I just, I took a different path. I was more interested in the computational aspects. So I was doing a PhD at Oxford in computational social science, which is kind of a type of applied math. You do a lot of the network stuff that Larry was talking about. And I was just really frustrated with it, because what I was studying was LinkedIn, how to analyze LinkedIn data, and that's really interesting. You can get some interesting insights from there. The math's really cool. But you really aren't going to change the world with LinkedIn data. Or maybe I just didn't find a way to change the world with LinkedIn data. But I just thought, well, let's learn something about a field that's just way more interesting. So around that time, the Human Microbiome Project, which was this NIH-funded, $173 million, 5-year project to understand the human microbiome, was ending. And they studied 250 people, as Larry said earlier. And I thought, maybe there's a way to do this better. The internet has changed so many fields. Why hasn't it changed science? So that was when we started uBiome, my co-founders and I. We get big data from bacteria. I'm going to tell you a little bit about sort of the challenge that motivated me and got me really excited about this, and then what we've done since then. So one of the things that sort of captured me as I started to look into what I could do with the skills that I already had in a totally different field was what's wrong with science. And we talked a lot about what's wrong with the healthcare and the payers, providers, all the sort of medical systems. But we haven't talked a lot about what's wrong with science. And a lot of the same problems are there. These big, massive institutions that are created for another age that don't really take advantage of the technologies that we have now. So science focuses on, first of all, weird people. So it focuses on all of us who are really weird. We're Western, we're educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. I didn't come up with this. There's a really great social science paper describing how badly most research describes humanity, because it only describes weird people like us. And science is no different. Also, science has really small sample sizes. A really good paper in Science or Nature has 200 people in it, and that's just amazing somehow. Whereas, if you have data points from Facebook, you have 3 million data points, billions of data points, and it's sort of taken for granted that most of the world participates in your science project. I don't know if you guys ever saw that Overly Honest Methods hashtag about how science is actually done. It's really hilarious. This was about a year ago, but it was really funny. It's sort of all the things that go wrong when you present, when you're trying to put together a science paper. Oh, we dropped the samples on the floor, so we decided to do our project differently. Stuff like that. And that sort of speaks to a lack of transparency in science. We all sort of submit our data to science if we're part of a study, or we read about science, but we're not part of science. We don't get to participate in science. It's like the spectator sport where there are no amateur sports. Journals are closed to the public. If I tell you about a really interesting finding, you probably can't read it unless you have university access. It's just this whole system that's really not set up for the crowd, for all of us to participate. So we take all these problems with that system for granted. No one studies things that can't get funded. You, the public, have no say whatsoever in what gets funded. No one ever asks the public what they think about science. They just want to test you and see if you know science. Studies research white American males. It's just a broken system, and that has to change. It's just sort of obvious when you look at it. I mean, we use crowdsourcing on the internet to design logos and, vote for whether things are hot or not, but we don't use it to solve the most important challenges facing humanity. It's just kind of ridiculous. So why are there all these problems? Because you're not involved. We're thought leaders here. Some of us are involved, but most people in the world are not involved. So the world right now has 7 million scientists in it. And those are people with PhDs working in a research capacity in an institution. So that's not that many people. What if we had 7 billion scientists? And science was this crowdsourced, collaborative effort, guided by experts in some cases, using the latest equipment, which, yes, you need some specialized skills to use, but involving the public in new ways. And we call that crowd science, which is a new way of looking at science. It's kind of obvious. It's the concept of crowdsourcing applied to science. But I think it will have tremendous, powerful effects because 7 billion scientists, rather than 7 million scientists, can really change the world. So what we've heard a lot about here is sort of the same idea from many different angles. So there are, there's a quantified self, there's patient-centric medicine, there's translational medicine, there's citizen science, there's crowd science. These are all saying basically the same thing. They're all saying these institutions, these monolithic institutions that are hard to get in and out of, these systems of funding, these systems of analysis, these systems of inclusion are just not working. They're not including most of the world. They're not including even most of the developed, Western, educated world. So what we did was we after that NIH-funded Human Microbiome Project ended, about 2 months after that, which was also about 3 months after I left Singularity University summer program, with this mission to go do something interesting in biology. And I have Ray McCauley and Daniel Kraft and a bunch of the other faculty there to thank for giving the inspiration that anyone can do this. We started this crowdfunding campaign. And we raised, in 10 weeks, we raised $350,000, which now doesn't sound like a lot because we raised a lot more than that since. But at the time, that was just like, it blew our expectations away. It was 10 times more than the previous citizen science project. It was more than anyone expected, and it was 10 times more than the NIH-funded Human Microbiome Project. So we thought in 10 weeks we beat the NIH. Like, that's crazy. And that's kind of a weird way of saying it because obviously we were standing on the shoulders of their project, and I mean they sort of laid the groundwork for the entire microbiome field. But you could just see how that $173 million that they spent got a lot more mileage when it was applied to something the public could be involved in. So Larry, I'll skip over the microbiome stuff because Larry's kind of explained this to you. So suffice to say, the microbiome is really important. There are more there are more bacterial cells than human cells. Some people dispute that 10-to-1 figure, but it's a lot. There are many more bacterial cells. The microbiome is implicated in just about everything. It sounds sort of like snake oil when you read off the list. You're like, how can it be related to all these things? But it really is, and it kind of makes sense because they're living on us and in us. So they're both biosensors and drugs at the same time. So the microbiome is doing all kinds of things in our bodies. And what we set out to do is figure out what those things are and to bring the power of big data in the crowd to that. So here's how our product works. You sample, the public samples at home. It's a really simple sampling kit. It's as not gross as you can get when collecting a gut sample. You take a survey. We sequence it in our lab in San Francisco. We were at the UCSF incubator for a while. Now we have our own lab that we've set up. And then we give results not only to any researchers that are involved, but to the public as well. So the public gets to get a copy of their own data. There's a great story that someone was telling me when I was telling me about this from a scientist at a corporate research lab who said that they do all these public studies with the public to ask them questions to try to develop better products, and people start asking for their data. And he said, what do you mean your data? Like, you don't get your data. And people, this is sort of the new generation. Of course you get your data. Like, why wouldn't you get your data? So the public gets their data, researchers get the data, and we get the data so we can mine it for interesting things that we can find. Some of which, I'll show you just a few little brief things we found so far. So we sample the 5 sites of the Human Microbiome Project to start. We can do others, and we're expanding to doing others. So that's the nose, mouth, skin, gut, and genitals. Like Larry said, we do this for $89, which is about about 1/100th of the price that you would pay at a research lab, and this just wasn't available to the public at all. We're actually setting up a clinical program. That's something I'm announcing here. So we will be able to offer these tests in more of a diagnostic capacity as opposed to a citizen science capacity. So people answer surveys. Also very detailed surveys about themselves. This is the oral survey, so for different sites, there are different questions. And then they get the results. And Catherine's outside at the booth. You can meet with her, and she can walk you through what our software does and tell you a little bit about where we're going with it. And we also do research partnerships. So we work with researchers all over the world. We worked with Harvard, Stanford, UCSF, Columbia, Garvin Institute, sort of you name it, and we do research studies with them, sampling their microbiome data, partly just to sort of tune our process, partly because we want to, do a lot of microbiome sequencing because I think it's really good for the world. So we do research partnerships as well as going direct to consumer. We've gotten funding, which is great, and this is our office. So we have a new office with people dancing, which I think is probably a good sign in terms of team culture. So let me just show you some of the results that we've had so far. So we sample a number of different sites. So this is looking at the skin of people on the paleo diet versus the vegetarian diet. And one of the really cool things that uBiome lets us do is answer questions that no government funding agency or corporate research lab would ever want to answer the question to. Like, who cares about the paleo diet? That's not really on the list of national funding priorities. And it shouldn't be, right? But it's something individuals are interested in. And by funding science together, we can answer questions that probably wouldn't be studied any other way. So these are very different effects on the skin microbiome of different kinds of diets, so we can sort of cross-reference different sites. We've also done some machine learning. I don't have this great visualizations like Larry does, but we've done some machine learning, and we can classify people's diet by looking at their microbiome, so we can tell what you're eating, which is kind of interesting. We also have a sort of an IBD Crohn's cohort that we've been doing some similar analysis on. It's really interesting. I mean, the microbiome, I think, has so much. There's just so much in it, and it's never been looked at before. We have 15,000 data points at this time, which is the largest microbiome data set, and there's just a lot there that we can all learn if we do it together. So I'm Jessica. This is uBiome, and we get big data from bacteria. And I just want to thank everyone for letting me speak here and for sort of taking me on this journey from the summer of 2012, when I just thought, there must be something more interesting I can do that will change the world and will involve science, and ends up with me on this stage here, able to tell you about what I've done, and hopefully be back here another point and tell you more about how much more we've discovered about the microbiome using crowd science.